Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the regular update from our nation's capital. We're still on that tipping point about whether we will be out today, tomorrow, Saturday. You know, the complete unpredictability of the Senate schedule is always something to behold. I'm going to hit four topics at the top, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. The first is this absolutely amazing abuse, once again, by the Trump team of President Trump pre-selling early reviews of his Trump social media posts. Now, when it was first announced, I thought maybe it was a joke that Trump was going to give to those individuals or entities that would pay $100,000 a month an early glimpse at his Truth Social posts. Why is that important? Well, we've seen repeatedly that Donald Trump uses his Truth Social posts to move the market, to make news. Oftentimes, it seems like a lot of times on Sunday evenings, there's a post about a new ceasefire with Iran, which will help bump up the stock market in the morning. That information, if it's gotten to somebody and they can trade on it, is a complete abuse of the system. So what have I done? Well, first, I wrote all of the financial services trade organizations, the bankers, the high-frequency traders, the securities individuals, saying, you know, please encourage your members to have some decency and not buy into this scam. That probably didn't do enough because it appears that a few firms have bought into this scam. So now I have put forward a law that would prohibit the sale of information that comes from a government-based website in any fashion where it would be monetized ahead of the rest of the market. The law would also make it illegal to trade on that early information. I hope the law will get some legs, or the bill will get some legs, because this kind of blatant, gross misuse to simply line Donald Trump and his family's pocket, trading on what in all definitions sure as heck looks like insider information, is again, it's jaw-droppingly corrupt. The fact that there's not been more across-the-board pushback from the financial services sector has been an embarrassment. My hope is by making this illegal, this type of activity, we can, again, at the end of the day, is we want to make sure that no individual investor is at a disadvantage because somebody could pay off the Trump family $100 grand and get access to information that moves the market. This is how people lose faith in the market, how they lose faith in our system. And again, I hope and pray that more people will step up on this critical topic. Second is also on an issue where we've not done enough, and that is the OPM hack. It was about 11 years ago that 10 years ago that 22 million federal employees, 4 million contractors had all their private information hacked. It was one of the biggest hacks in modern American history. It exposed extraordinary personal information. We've often found that the entity that hacked into this private information was the Chinese government, disproportionately here in the DMV area, where lots and lots of federal employees live or are retired. So at that moment, during the time of the initial hack, we provided 10-year security coverage to make sure that as your information came out, it was either erased from the web. And it's a series of trying to make sure your information is more secure even though it's been hacked. That 10-year timeline runs out. So working with Eleanor Holmes Norton on one of her last actions as a member of the House. She and I have put forward legislation. Tim Kaine, Chris Van Hollen, and others are supporting it. This is common sense. It extends the 10-year protection for the balance of these people's lives, because they are always going to be vulnerable to where we didn't keep our security high enough at Office of Personnel Management. None of those federal employees or contractors did anything wrong. That's why we should provide this kind of lifelong protection that has been in existence for 10 years and under our plan would continue. Another issue I wanted to touch on was black lung. New data has come out. It literally is close to 33% of all of our miners who've been working underground for more than, I believe, 25 years have obtained black lung. And increasingly, the numbers are even quite high for miners who's only been underground 10 years. And we're seeing black lung hit no longer simply people in their 60s, but in their 40s and even earlier. Why I will continue to fight for getting these miners and their families the benefits. We've seen this administration cut back on testing. We've seen the administration cut back on benefits to black lung miners. We've seen, frankly, things like the silica dust, which oftentimes is so small, gets into the lungs, and to see these mostly young men, literally with a death sentence that black lung will play out over years is really heartbreaking. And I think, again, we need to do our duty and do our obligation. We've said to coal miners for a long time, we're going to make these promises about your health, your benefits, your widows and your family's health. It has been remarkable how hard we've had to fight to keep those promises. And unfortunately, in the case of black lung, this administration is not keeping those promises. So we're trying to up the pressure to see if we can simply, again, particularly in terms of the silica test, let the health decisions rule, not an administration that, while it talks a good game about coal miners, really doesn't do much about their health. Last item, I just want to make sure I've hit everything. Oh, yeah, one last one, which is critically important, and that's election monitoring. We just did our primaries on Tuesday in Virginia, and the Justice Department sent out election monitors, particularly in communities like Fairfax and Prince William, which was a little unusual. Historically, election monitors have been sent into communities where there's been on a historical basis, large black populations and efforts to kind of make sure that minority populations are not discriminated against in voting. This effort, and we're waiting to get a full report, but some of the offhand comments that I got reported was that, election officials were being harassed. They were being asked to fill out long-term forms while they were still trying to keep their polling station open. I even heard a report that I want to make sure is validated that election workers were being harassed if they spoke Spanish to any of the voters coming in. The whole purpose of election monitoring is to maintain safety, security, and the fact that our elections ought to be free and fair and accurately counted. I continue to worry that this administration, led by the president, is going to try to interfere in our elections. I think we spent a lot of time a few weeks ago when he made that kind of speech that completely failed, didn't even impress his own followers, where he made rash comments. One, remember, attacking China, and then 4 days later he was basically saying China's okay now. So I am concerned if officials from the DOJ are not out to protect our vote, but to squash or try to intimidate our vote. What the forces who want to stop free and fair elections is, they want to convince you your vote doesn't matter. And regardless of who you support or which party you support, we cannot have suppression of the vote. So I hope everyone will do their darndest this year to get out and vote in this year's elections. We start early vote literally in about 40 days in the middle of September. And, to those who want to squash our right to vote, I say, let's vote in record numbers to make it clear that there'll be no ability, because the margins will be so great that there'll be no ability for this administration to interfere or corrupt the process that needs to be literally sacred. So why don't I stop there and be happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is from Mitchell with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Good afternoon. Thanks, as always, for joining us. Speaking of elections, you now know who your Republican opponent will be. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you said will be your final Senate campaign and what issues you'll be focusing on in the months ahead of the election.
Well, listen, I'm looking forward to asking Virginians to hire me one last time. I'm going to be focusing a lot on the upside and the downsides of artificial intelligence. Part of this deals with how we put some federal guardrails around data centers in terms of power, water, setbacks, how we make sure that we engage with the AI companies on job retraining. I think there's going to be long-term AI job growth over the next 2 to 5 years. I think there is going to be some real job disruption, and these AI companies need to help us retrain into jobs that will exist. I think I want to make sure we move further along in healthcare. We've seen this administration cut 300,000 Virginians off of Medicaid, 44,000 Virginians off the Affordable Care tax credits. I think we need to move to universal health care. We spend so much time in this country debating who gets covered and very little time on how we can actually lower health care costs. If we can start with a universal health care system, I think that moves us forward. I also think we obviously need to roll back these tariffs and stop this war of choice with Iran. The tariffs directly are a tax on American people. That's why grocery prices and everything you buy in the store has gone up. The Iranian war has obviously driven up the price of gasoline. You want tangible items that will lower cost? Well, let's get rid of the tariffs and reimburse them to the American people. Let's end this war of choice, which has been a disaster. And then finally, I want to also make sure issues that don't get as much attention. I've been working on for a long time with CDFIs on access to capital for underserved communities. I can work more on that. I want to make sure that the new housing legislation we pass, because we're millions of units short on housing, actually gets implemented in a way that we can see more affordable housing built around the Commonwealth. So I got plenty on my plate, as well as the ongoing role I'll be playing on the Intelligence Committee to make sure that our intelligence workforce is still able to speak truth to power. I'm excited about the work. I'm excited about making my case to the people of Virginia. And if I'm rehired, I've got a big agenda to jump into.
Senator, our next question is from Michael with Virginia Public Radio.
Hey, Senator, thanks for doing these. I really appreciate it. We're interested in asking you about the merger between Dominion Energy and NextEra. Governor Spanberger is intervening in this case, which means that she's actually a party and can submit, legal documents. I don't think you ever did anything quite like that during your time as governor, but I'm curious about your thoughts about the merger. Congressman Vindman came out recently against the merger, saying it serves distant corporate executives and investors. And I'm wondering what you think about this thing. And 6 months enough time. There's some discussion about potentially extending that deadline for the State Corporation Commission. So what are your thoughts on the merger and or extending that deadline for making a decision?
Well, first of all, I share the governor's concerns. We're taking a Virginia entity that we all know and have worked with for years, Dominion, and having this merger with the Florida enterprise that may not have quite the same kind of good record that Dominion has. So getting more facts is important. I have not weighed in on the timeline yet, but I would say I generally support what the governor is trying to do to make sure that all Virginians can get access in the most transparent way possible of the good, the bad, and where the problems may lie. I do understand as well, some of the business reasons that Dominion, while a very large company, is not one of the top 4 or 5 biggest utility companies, so they need a bigger balance sheet if they're going to move into areas where I hope they will, things like small modular nukes, SMRs, or see if we can expand some of the renewable energy portfolio that they have. So I'm going to keep a close eye on this. I'm going to follow what the governor finds, and I'm going to reserve my final comment until I get a few more facts. But I get the business case, but I also get the downside case of we don't want folks in Florida, losing that connection with our Virginia customers, of which we all are.
Senator, our next question is from Tyler with WRIC.
Hey, Senator, thanks for doing this. I know you posted on social media that you would be voting against Todd Blanche's nomination to be the Attorney General. Can you just explain why? And then does his order terminating that anti-weaponization fund do anything to affect your decision?
Well, Todd Blanche, who only claim to fame is he was Donald Trump's personal lawyer, doesn't seem to me to be a valid consideration to be the Attorney General of the United States. Matter of fact, it's evident that from his testimony that he still views himself more as Trump's personal lawyer than the top law enforcement official for our country. That scares the dickens out of me. On the question of what language he gave to some of my Republican colleagues, I don't claim to be a legal expert, but many other senators think that the promise on getting rid of the $1.8 billion slush fund paid for by taxpayer money, that he didn't give an absolute ban on that. Again, I'll let the legal scholars determine that. But what I don't want to see, and this is what my fear is, we have already seen in prior Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, when she intervened on domestic law enforcement activities. We've seen Kash Patel, I believe, abuse the office of the FBI. I think we've seen Pam Bondi be a pretty darn incompetent Attorney General. Todd Blanche brings nothing but this absolute loyalty to Trump, and that in itself, in my mind, is disqualifying when it becomes clear that even if the law says otherwise, his first and only major goal seems to be to please the president. That's not what the job of the Attorney General is. The job of the Attorney General is to faithfully implement, in a fair and balanced way, the laws of our land. I don't think he's qualified.
Senator, our next question is from Jada with ABC 13.
Hi, Senator. I just wanted to ask if any federal official, Republican or Democrat, misled Congress under oath, do you believe that person should be held accountable? And does that standard apply equally to Dr. Fauci?
Well, if there's an example, do you have any specific example of a witness lying under oath? What proof do you have, and who are you accusing?
Not accusing anyone, Senator. Let me reword. Do you believe that anyone should be held accountable under oath if, do you believe Dr. Fauci should?
Ma'am, all I can tell you is, I mean,
and Congress's inquiry.
All right, here's what I would say, ma'am. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights gives an American ability to claim the Fifth and not self-incriminate themselves. That by law is not that by law is a constitutional right. So I don't know if you're making the assumption that by claiming your Fifth Amendment constitutional right, you've broken the law. I think you don't understand the law, or don't understand that by its own nature is not an admission of anything. It is just saying you take that constitutional right and you exercise it. I think we get into a fairly scary place if people using their constitutional rights is somehow viewed as in and of itself a violation. That is not the way the Constitution was written. Whether it is a contempt of Congress, which is a different total charge. I'm not an expert, but again, I hope you would realize that your right to religion, your right to free speech, your right to religion, your right to have the Fifth Amendment right not to self-incriminate, those are rights granted by our Constitution. It makes our country different. And I just hope people would not be bought into some kind of, which would be a really scary notion, that if you choose to worship a simple way, or if you choose to speak a certain line, or if you choose to protect yourself by the Fifth Amendment, that you are breaking the law, because you're not.
Senator, our next question is from Nick with Falls Church News Press.
Thanks, Senator. My question goes to the primaries on Tuesday. Has your evaluation of the risk to the November elections changed at all, or do you have any further thoughts other than what you've already expressed about the results of that election?
Well, Nick, I want to get a good description of the behavior of these election monitors around Virginia. Was it appropriate behavior, or was it an effort to try to intimidate voters into not voting? I don't have that information yet. I want to get a fulsome report. Two, I still fear that this president or people in his administration are going to try to intervene. The president's disastrous speech notwithstanding, where he brought up and tried to declassify information that, frankly, had no bearing on the issues at hand, or it was so clumsily put together that, legitimate networks didn't carry it as news. It was just a bunch of falsehoods. But as we've seen, Donald Trump is still obsessed about losing in 2020. He wants to keep relitigating that. And if we have free and fair elections in 26, I believe he and his policies will be soundly rejected. So I don't think we're out of the woods at all. It's why, both on the hand of, there are a number of voting rights groups and others who are meeting on a regular basis to push back when his administration violates the law with lawsuits. And it is going to continue to require me and others to speak up if we see a fake piece of intelligence brought up, or something that's not been any due diligence done on, and that he suddenly uses as an excuse to whether to bring troops or to try to jerk out voting machines. So this is still full alert time, and I think the full alert time will even ratchet up once we get past Labor Day.
Senator, our final question is from Raquel with Nexstar Media Group.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for taking out the time. I wanted to talk with you and see if you could elaborate on this letter you and some of your Democratic colleagues have sent over to the White House, expressing concern about this AI framework that has yet to be published, but we know is nearing, I guess, its completion. It sounds like you guys have raised a few issues from what we've heard or read at this point. Could you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, I'm glad to see the White House is at least evolving. The White House a number of months ago said, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. We're not going to put any kind of guardrails at all in place. Then after Anthropic's Mythos project came out, even the folks at the Defense Department said, holy heck, this could be a real game changer. And they started a review process. The question is it going to be a voluntary review or a mandatory review? What I find is again, I guess I'm not surprised, but the White House zigs and zags. I mean, they were going to say voluntary review, and then when one of the companies, Anthropic again, was going to put out its next model, Fable, It was jerked off the marketplace a few hours after it was put onto the marketplace. No predictability. And now you've got this, guidance, but the guidance is not going to be shared with Congress or the public. That's crazy to me. I very much believe you need a level of pre-screening review before these frontier models are released. Less need around the open source models because there's easier ways to monitor. But on these frontier closed models, when we are talking about potentially enormous harm, the financial sector thought, oh my gosh, this could undermine Americans' complete confidence in the finance sector because of the ability to have these tools find vulnerabilities that could be then exploited. You can't rely on simply the goodwill of some tech CEO that he or she will think, well, maybe I ought to share it with the government. No, you wouldn't let a new car go out. You wouldn't let a new plane fly without some safety testing. And I think the same should apply here in the case of AI models. And I think the only reason that would hold back is if, some of these AI companies have enormous power. They are the most, on market cap at least, they are the most powerful companies in the world. And I do feel like they may have undue influence on how any kind of regulatory regime would be set up. Of course, they're not going to want any review because they're only about selling chips or selling new models, and that does not mean selling safe models.
Senator, those were all our questions for today.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody.